The living conversation is both between us and within us. And the between us is the bigger and bigger us. So there are so many levels of conversation. We want to make room, for those levels and for that conversation to be alive in us. That as Anna sort of reminded us, the living conversation is an organism of meaning that we are, that is within us, that we are within. Then if there's any gesture or movement of release and getting here that is right for you, and being influenced by the whole body, focusing people, we can bring ourselves into our present moment here together. There's a big job for us tonight. The third of the workshops about caring for the conversation and when conversation goes astray. And several of you have asked questions like Rachel asked, well, what if the conversation isn't safe? What do you withdraw? What do you do? And many conversations about the moments of difficulty. And so we might call this evening riding the waves of conversation. But what can we say about that huge subject, in the 2 hours that we have together? It's very, very big, and it's very, very, very important. And I'm hoping that this workshop series will just be a little taste. Some of you will go further by taking the community empowerment training starting next Wednesday. Others of you will take it further in many other ways. But I'm just going to start by saying a couple of things before we even get a chance to say what's there for us from last time. I don't know if I agonized. I was going to say I agonized about how to condense so much into our 2 hours, but I wouldn't say I agonized. I puzzled because it was enjoyable to think about it. When I would wake up in the middle of the night, that's what I would think about. What would be the most, get us into it the most? So one of the concepts that I think is most important and a handle for us comes from nonlinear dynamic systems theory. And that philosophy, a contemporary philosophy of, I would call postmodernism, that parallels Jean's philosophy in many ways, talks about systems of all kinds of living systems, including stars and microorganisms and, all kinds of things. And one of the main concepts is what they call the tipping point. And that's the point that living organisms need to hover around between something that is too rigid and something that's too chaotic. So if you picture a galaxy or something, or whether it's going to be able to be self-generating will depend a great deal on whether it can find that balance. And friendship, our relationships with ourselves, focusing partnerships, therapy relationships, and conversation and community wellness all depend on finding that balance between between too much repetition, stuckness, deadness, expected behavior, and too much chaotic unpredictability, flying off the handle, too much going on to process, things going faster than we can manage, getting triggered. So if you picture these things, the living conversation, caring for the living conversation entails finding that that place that has the spontaneity and the improvisation, the risk-taking, and at the same time has the continuity, the feeling of the trust that something will continue and be held, the structure of what keeps us together, feeling like a we. Shakopee pointed out in our last group that Jean's philosophy is very much a structure that keeps us within that realm of feeling safe, but not too safe, feeling the freedom to play and not going off the rails, going to the edge, but not going over the edge. And I think that that concept is a wonderful concept for us to keep in mind, because we can almost picture it. When things go wrong, how are they going wrong? Are they too rigid, or are they too chaotic? And if we see ourselves as not just caring for ourselves, which is of course absolutely essential, and not just caring for the other that we love in the group, but caring for the conversation itself, then we're wanting to be able to be empowered to move the conversation either in the direction of a little more saying, a little more risk-taking, a little more calling it as we feel it is, and taking, saying it as in a personal way, or we want to be able to call it back to structure and say, let's take a breath here. And anybody can do that in the conversation. You can even do that in a political conversation. People might look at you a little funny, but you could still do it. You could say, oh, I need a breath here. Anybody else need a breath? Let's just take a minute to see what we're saying. You see, if you don't say it in that formal kind of way, but you say it from yourself, oh, I need a minute. Let's see what's going on here. It can bring us back to the place where there's enough structure, enough safety. So I just want to say that, and I want to leave a pause for us to take it in. And then I want to bring us back to where we are here in the conversation, which isn't just tonight. Now it's our third week, and our conversation has become thick and meaningful with a great deal of complexity from the input of all of us, even those who haven't spoken in the large group, but we feel you. The conversation that has developed over these 3 weeks. We want to come right here now to this tip of where we are in this adventure of finding the life in the conversation and caring for it, tending it like a garden. seeing where it needs water, where it needs sunshine, being willing sometimes to get up before dawn to stake it down if a storm is coming. So I want to ask you, before we go further, what you remember, what struck you from last time. And I want to share a little bit of what struck me from last time, but I'd like you to go first. So anybody, just what you remember. It doesn't have to be the most important thing. In my class in China, I just loved my teaching in China. It was all in translation. I asked the students, what they remembered from the day before, and one of the students made her way to the microphone, and it was so important for her to speak. And she said, "I remember your earrings. I never saw earrings like that before." And it was such a wonderful moment. It was so alive. It was so real. And it was something that was unsayable, not because it was too much to say, but just because nobody would say that. And she said that. There was a big relief or release, or people laughing and smiling at each other about my earrings. But I don't remember which earrings they were. But so anything that you have to say that you remember is welcome.
I remember that Ginevra said that when she's not met, she watches TV.
Yes, I remember that moment too. And the comments about how deeply important it is for us to be met, that deep longing to be met, and what happens when we aren't met. And I remember someone else saying, I think it was Olivia, about how she commits to meeting herself. And that was very intriguing, how she does that, to meet herself when she isn't met. Anybody else? Thanks for starting us out, Jim. One thing that I remember is that someone pointed out the gigantic step it is to go from a focusing situation where we're taking turns, even in a group, we're taking turns, or in my day, a consciousness raising group where we took turns, and a conversation where we're speaking spontaneously. And then you have to think, when do I speak? Am I speaking too much? I'm thinking to myself, am I speaking too much? Here, Lynn, shut up a minute. Do I speak before or after? Is this point now past? Can I go back to all of those complex decisions about being part of a web, being part of a system? So thank you for starting.
And I want to say that what I remember from last week was the internal agitation and reverberation of my body as I was sitting here. And I was both holding this space that's very white, and holding what's transpiring with the Haitian community. And then having had a call with a friend and holding that too. And sort of like this triangle that it's really every point is touching, but every point or every side of that triangle can also stand alone and without the need of the support of the other. But then that's not a triangle. Then that's a something else. That's just three stick in the middle of nowhere without. And so what I remember in that day last week, it's this sort of like not having been met, but also not having been asked to be met. So there was that part of myself that felt like, I'm not being met here. What's going on here, right? but it's also after that, that part that recognize and touch that I also didn't ask to be met. I also didn't bring that into the space, and noticing how there are times when I can get into the space of blaming the other when I too bear responsibility for how the conversation evolves and unfolds. And so that really carried me forward this next week after last week Wednesday. And I was able to take those bits and pieces and integrate them to other places where I was kind of like, I'm not being met. No one is. And then take a breath and really be honest with myself and ask how I'm not giving even people the opportunity to meet me and hold me. And so that's kind of like my piece from last week.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we might put that in the framework of the tipping point that that the not saying, not asking, not saying is the being too safe. That maybe that would bring it more in to say, you know, nobody's talking about the elephant in the room with this, with the Haitian, with something. I need to acknowledge that, or whatever it is that you would say that would bring you in, would be that little risk. We're going to talk more about that later on in the evening.
I kind of don't remember what was discussed in this group, and I had some conversations out of the group with people in the group, but what's been hitting me is this general way of being received, and how a lot of the Zoom groups that I'm in, nobody receives you like that. That's in contrast to this group, but how unsafe and uncomfortable it can feel just to say something, and then it just seems to go off into the, you know, the tether or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes. How important it is to be received. And then what happens when there's this vacancy, or it goes off in another direction. That's one of our big challenges, right? How we care for ourselves as well as caring for the conversation. One of the things that I remember is Paula saying that in her small group, she felt like the magic didn't happen, and she was disappointed. And then she realized that, well, you can't just have certain techniques and then the magic will happen. But there was something about her acknowledging that the magic didn't happen that felt like several people felt very enlivened by that. And I was thinking about part of the magic is the magic of being able to talk about the conversation, being able to say, I won't say the unsayable, because that may be going too far. Saying the outside the box, because we have all these boxes of conversation, but to say, oh, I don't feel the magic and I want it, or to say, I don't feel like I'm being received, or for Isabel to say, you know, there's something going on here and I'm not being met here. There's something very enlivening and bringing the tipping point to the center of acknowledging something that's unnoticed, and the intimacy of talking about the conversation itself.
And Lynn, I see that Monica's had her hand up.
Oh, please, thank you
Yes,
for, I'm not going to see you. Those of you who
okay.
don't know, I have poor vision. Just speak. But I love that you're speaking for each other to say, I want to hear from so-and-so. She has her hand up. Great.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just want to take in first what Laura says. Hi, Laura. About how difficult it's been for me to be in these Zoom groups, because whenever I share something, it just goes out on the void. You know, it seems that the next person that is gonna share this doesn't even listening to what I'm saying. So I thank you for encouraging me to participate. And the second thing that encouraged me to participate today was the hearing part, where sometimes I feel like I don't want to participate because I don't want to lose people times that I'm not going to say something smart enough or interesting enough or has to do with the class before. So sometimes I feel like I don't want to participate because I'm not smart enough. I don't have anything like really has to do with the class. And my participation today is about I fell asleep last class. So I went away. I was completely exhausted. So I was so sorry. I was making a lot of effort to keep on being awake because there's only 3 classes, and I was like, oh my God, I have to be awake for the Lynn's class, but I couldn't. And the third thing I want to share is that, well, I'm from Mexico, and also part of my personality is that I'm very spontaneous, and I love my sense of humor. And what I have found, what I have found not only in this class or in other focusing communities is that sometimes I go like, hugging people, and people is like, this crazy woman. And so sometimes I feel like my spontaneity has to be shut off because I feel like I'm too much, you know? So that's what I wanted to share.
Wow. Wonderful riches there.
And I'd like to say to Monica that I really received what you just said, and especially the fact that sometimes we don't speak because we don't think we're smart enough or we're going to add something of value, and that kind of silences us. And sometimes just because our personalities are more exuberant than the classical Western personality, that we hesitate to speak so that people don't think we're crazy. And I really took that in.
Monica, I love your, I love it.
I think, Monica, that you gave us a new term, the earring principle.
Ah,
We're always afraid of being too much, being too little, not being relevant enough, being, too big, too small, talking too much. There's that feeling that we have of whatever it is, it's not going to be right. we're too spontaneous. I always had the other side, Monica, of feeling like I'm not exuberant enough. I'm like this wasp and I just say things, blah. And I wanted to be able to be more emotional. But it reminds me, I hope the men forgive me for this sexist remark, but it reminds me of breast sizes. We women often never feel that our breasts are the right size. They're either too big, they're too little, they're this, they're that. And that's sort of the same way in a conversation. We're not feel like whatever way we are isn't going to be the right way. So you took a big risk in saying what you said to give us that directionality between safe and not too safe.
I did listen to the YouTube recording like probably 80%, and then I think I was maybe just reminded of the tone of the conversation, reassuring, comforting, openness, receptivity, a lot of a lot of people willingness to receive, I think, and then I'm a little I'm thinking about what Laura said and Monica, and this sometimes in other Zoom groups there isn't a nobody is being received, or in ways that perhaps here that if we risk in this group we can be received, and so that's what it comes to mind. So just that's what it was. My comment, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. Here, maybe we can risk to be received.
There can be something that develops in the culture of a living conversation, some sort of intentionality around that. And one important dimension of that is the commitment to receive the other. And, I have varying kinds of experiences of kind of being in certain kinds of discussion groups, and they're very topic oriented, and I'm not against topics, but some of the person who's interacting with the topic doesn't get related to, and it's a way, and that's a missing piece for me around that kind of the kind of aliveness that can come through going downstairs or connecting with the person behind the words in some kind of way. And they can change the words, and the concepts can change too, but it's that commitment to the receptivity. It slows things down too. And it's less clever. That's my beef.
What do you mean it's less clever?
Well, sometimes you can just, certain kinds of conversations, sort of picking up on that, certain kinds of conversations can be, you're back and forthing around, ideas and that kind of thing. And we can get caught in sort of playing with or shaping the ideas and being funny about it and that kind of thing. And again, it's nice to laugh and all of that kind of stuff. But there's an orientation towards, sort of pick up on what Monica was, and everybody probably has had some version of experience with. There's this orientation towards being smart, and that can miss something. So
There's what comes to me as a kind of competitive in the play, and that play can be so much more creative without the element of being smarter than or being better than in some way somebody else in the group. That kind of game, the competitive games versus the creative games.
Yeah. Yeah, that word helps me understand, think about that particular C, the competitive thing in some kind of way, yeah. And there's a difference, I'll just say really quickly, there's a difference between, when you say something like, oh, I love that idea. There's a difference between saying that and saying, well, that's an excellent idea. And there's a difference there.
Mm-hmm.
Different kind of aliveness.
Mm-hmm. Different felt sense.
Yeah, I'll park here.
I wanted to also catch that about how we're creating a culture. A culture is so important in terms of a living conversation, because it's that nebulous usness that may not be deliberate, intentional rules of conversation, but it's the felt sense of how we are together that we're developing, and that expands and grows, and we feel held by a culture and by the multiculturalness of all of us in many, many, many ways, of all of our cultures coming together, but forming a particular us culture of this group and how we are together.
There's something of the spontaneity that seems really important, that word from Monica, and then I think from Steve, and just something about the spontaneity and the kind of like a bit of the dipping in and then coming back up, but being able to sort of talk about the interaction and also the content or the subject matter. Like to have both seems to bring an aliveness, and it's like how conversation isn't a spectator sport, or you don't want it to be a rerun. You can kind of I at least can feel held captive if somebody wants to tell me a narrative that you can tell they've told it 1,000 times and there's a certain reaction they want, and they're not telling you for any particular reason other than that it's dinner conversation or it's supposed to be an amusing story, and you're like forced into being an audience, but there's not an alive interaction. They're not telling you because they need anything or asking anything of you in particular. You're sort of unnecessary. You sort of have audience with the Pope, but no blessing. You just are like forced into audienceness for something you didn't buy a ticket to. So that is unpleasant. I just don't know what that has to do with anything. But the aliveness, it's like there's an attunement to the interaction, or an interest and curiosity in not just the content of what's coming from the other, but like the relating between you, sort of what's emerging or what's evolving, and the exchange of information. Mm-hmm. So I don't have like this skill set whatsoever, but it seems like there are ways to kind of, in focusing, how we'll say, well, how is that for you? Or is this right? Or have I got this? I used to have a non-focusing friend who would say to me, how would you like me to listen? Or what kind of feedback would you like? Or is it okay if I just blurb? Like, can you receive that for me? Can I just like kind of get this out? And it was so courteous. It was like knocking on the door before just plunging into the room like Kramer or something, in Seinfeld. It was so like, is this okay? And it just, I don't know, there was like a language that was created, like a doorway or something that isn't always there. So, and then I guess the question I have, that's what I wanted to share. And the question is, it's in the spontaneity or in the sort of risking, speaking about what is there. I find it quite tricky to find the right distance or how to sort of not be too close and not be too obtuse, but sort of what is okay to speak about and what is okay to say, you seem upset, or I notice your nose is crinkled or something, but not to say, I don't know, something that would be aggressive or hit the wrong note and really close the person off or offend them or be an unintended or intended aggression. So it's quite tricky to for me. I don't have a knowing about this is bringing it into the present, but not too much so that the person is like not safe or I'm not safe.
So we're talking here about it's not a spectator sport. But then I had the image of this ball game, you know, and you don't want to hit the person in the head with the ball. You want to throw it in a way that somebody else will catch it. You don't want it to go out of bounds. But there's a lot to it, isn't there? It's a very complex game because there are many, many balls in the air and many different levels. And we're doing it with our felt sense. We're not just doing it consciously. We're doing it in so many ways. Is it too close? Is it too distant? Will it get the ball in the basket if that's what we're doing? What you said reminded me also, Rachel, of somebody talking last time. Wait a minute, I lost my thought there. It went right out of my head. Wow.
That happens to you.
Go back and find it later.
Yes.
I'll call you all up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that was the thing that went right out of my head.
I don't know if this will bring it back on track, but there's something that comes from you, just this image of sort of volleying, like to toss the ball so that the other person is likely to catch it or has the opportunity to step back if they just had their nails done or something and can't catch the ball. But so it's not a violent like spiking onto them, and it's, yeah. So there's something about like a gentle, like with a balloon where you just kind of hit it lightly to the other.
I just wanted to say something in response to what Rachel said, if that's okay. I just was so touched by your story about your friend who was so respectful about before starting the conversation, asking about what kind of, feedback you wanted or the time or the kind of listening. And it just reminded me of something I heard somewhere once that has really stayed with me. I wish I could remember the writer or where I saw this, but it was something about, to never assume that just because somebody is being silent, that we're not interrupting when we say something to them. I mean, they might be in the middle of a really major thought or, so that sense of, I don't think it was in a focusing context, but it might have been, but that sense of really asking permission, like, is this a good time for us to have a conversation. Just because you're sitting there, quote unquote, not doing anything, I have no idea what may be going on inside.
Checking. It's so important in focusing. Let's hear one more comment, and then I'm gonna.
Kati's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, thank you. I love this new culture where we're all calling on people that have their hands up.
I'm listening to this conversation and I'm resonating from last week, and I remember how difficult the exercise was, because everything that kept coming up were about, you asked for a positive conversation. I kept thinking of negative conversations. A living conversation, I kept thinking about conversations that aren't happening, dialogues that aren't happening, the volleying, the spiking even that isn't happening. And that kept happening a lot last week. And I, this bit about culture, I'm still resonating with Isabel's comment earlier about Haitian immigrants. And I think that sometimes it's hard to have conversations about culture when there isn't common language. And sometimes all the common thing that then connects, and this is what I feel and sometimes I sense, is the silence that sometimes follows. And that's something that's unifying. And for me, I think part of what I like about Jen Lynn's work, there is something unifying about that felt sense that each one of us, every living being, carries, regardless of where we're from. And not everyone focuses, but it is something that I try to remember, because it is a very, the silence can sometimes get very loud, and it can go on for too long at times when there isn't a listening ear on the other end.
Absolutely. And then it's so tender, that place where we want to leave a pause for people to take in what you said, and then the pause can feel like a silence. It can sort of be like that leaping and catching that Rachel talked about last week of in the tango. Like we let a pause, but then will we be able to catch that? So let's just let the pause be. But anyone who has something to say here now in response to catch that ball is welcome.
To me, what comes for me is it's kind of like listening to the silence, or trying to listen, like, what kind of silence is this silence? There's so many, what Katie said, so many, there are so many different silences. It's like one silence is, you can't even listen to it because it doesn't have words, but somehow you can feel it, right? You can feel what kind of silence is this. Is it a pause, or is it a silence of disconnection, or is it a silence of not understanding, or is it a silence of anger? Yeah. And I also know that some people cannot bear any silence at all. They just get really nervous, and they want to fill it up with sound and words. And and people have their own way in it, how they deal with silence. And
I'm taken back to spaces that I've been in where I've said things and I could hear the crickets in the room chirping and the uncomfortability of it. And I am imagining and I'm empathizing of how many times maybe I have done that to other people, and how that was never acknowledged because maybe I didn't know that it was happening or that I was doing it. And so within myself right now, there is this changing that's occurring of, okay, so what do you do next time when I'm in that space and I drop the ball, or I don't know how to pick up the conversation on what someone has said. And so there is something occurring within me of like, well, how do you carry forward this experience that I'm having internally and share and empathize with someone who have experienced the same thing? And an awareness that is occurring to me of, yeah, chances are this has probably happened elsewhere where I've been a part of that too.
The feeling that maybe in the silence when you take a risk, that it could be that people don't know how to pick up the ball.
Right.
Uh,
I can imagine there are difficult communities that I wouldn't know how to relate to. And I'm asking myself, what would it be like for me to say out loud, you know what, I heard what you said, but I can't really relate because I'm not from that place that you're from. And that's something I'm asking myself, like, what would be the language? What words would I use to let that person know that, I get it, but I don't know what to say in response. And maybe even saying that out loud might be good enough.
I mean, I think that, I mean, to respond, I mean, I think that what I said before, that it seems that in this place, if we were to say openly, listen, I'm hurting because what's happening in Haiti, then perhaps there'll be a response that will be met. So I think, I don't know, I mean, perhaps it needed to be articulated taking the risk in saying something. You know what I mean? Like, because I don't know, what I'm hearing is that somehow we should have picked up that people were hurting about what's going on, but nobody's saying, I'm hurting what's happening, and with the Haitian population in Mexico, and so they have a lot of pain. And then maybe from that place, then we can met the people who are, hurting. You know what I mean? That's what what I'm saying. I think the space is here that if we're having something is going on with us, that we can risk and say it, and I think there'll be a response.
Is it all right if I respond to that, Roberta? Yeah.
Sure.
I go back to Lynn's comment about breast sizes. And even as I hear you say that comment, something occurs to me and I'm like, well, yeah, there's never enough to say about something that, sure, there are Haitians in Mexico and under bridges, but I'm like, well, what about the Afghans just a few weeks ago, right? Or what about the Uyghurs in China? Like, there's always suffering and there's always harm that's inflicted on someone somewhere. And, it's really difficult to hold space for the heaviness of that comes with, from my perspective, there's a heaviness that comes with poverty. And that's not something that is easy to hold space for. Because there is such great, deep, and it's like going into the abyss of these conversations about suffering and who suffers and what do you do about it, because the issues are so global, are so deeply entrenched, and there is a deep sense of helplessness that goes along with it. Yeah.
I just want to say I'm off camera, but I'm alive and well here. Just taking all this in, and I just put something in the chat. But it's a TED Talk, and the name of it is Why I Have Coffee with People Who Send Me Hate Mail. And I think that speaks directly to what Katie, you were speaking to. It's how do I engage in conversation that are difficult for me from a place of kindness and compassion. And I don't know how to do that all the time, right? I don't know. And so this is an experiment that I'm conducting with myself just to check in when I didn't do that. Like even now, I pulled back because I was like, excuse me, this is recorded. But I was like, fuck, Isabel, why you have to bring that up? Shut up and sit down, right? And yeah, I have to check that. And I brought it up because it's alive for me. I have friends from Haiti. I have friends from the Middle East, and it's alive. And how can I sit here in this group and not share some of what is alive for me? That would seem hypocritical, right? And not looking for anything to be done about it, but sort of like presencing myself. So just wanted to say that. So I'm still here. I'm just off camera because I'm like I'm beginning to go down in my tiredness level. So I'm like, ugh. So, but still here, present and well.
I think that what you said, Isabel, and we're learning, one of the things that we're trying to learn is to listen not only to the individual and to the subject, the content, but to listen to the flow of the conversation, how the us is moving. And we're moving in this direction of making it safe to talk about the difficult things to talk about, talking about saying something that where you're feeling on the edge, or you're feeling that you can be marginalized, or you're feeling like people won't understand, and finding the courage to say something. But then, Katie, I thought that there was a real forward movement in your saying all of us drop the ball, or don't know how to catch it at times, and just saying, I don't know how to respond, but I'm with you. Your intention is the way of catching the ball. And I thought that was a wonderful way of talking about the power of talking about the conversation. It's not just what the person is, the content, but saying, I don't know what to say right now, but I'm here with you, which is what you're doing, Isabel. You're saying, I'm here, but I'm off camera. So I think this is a moment when we're going to have, we're a little over time here. I'm going to give you a little attunement, and then we're going to have a 10-minute break, and go into our breakout rooms of 3, shall we? Of 3, and just talk about what came up in this conversation so far, and in the attunement in that group of 3, and see what happens if you don't take turns. But if you want to take turns, it's okay. That's like the bike with training wheels, is to take turns. Sometimes that's good to be able to go back to. So are you ready to have a brief attunement? And then we're going to just sit with that attunement while you take your little break. Maybe we can just take a 6-minute break or something, and then go into our breakout rooms and share. Does that seem right? Okay, let's take a breath and settle in our seats and just give all this that has come and evolved a chance to settle like a big meal. So much complexity, so many levels, so many worlds that come together here in this world. And coming back to that idea of the tipping point, and what Katie said about how all of us have dropped the ball or don't know how to pick up the ball or catch the ball at times. And on the other side, all of us have been the one to throw the ball too hard and it hits the other person in the guts or something. Or there's the chaos of too many balls being thrown at the same time and then feeling like you're dodging balls rather than playing. We're just going to feel that image of that place where we can go this way or this way. And the invitation, the simplest thing is to say something about the experience. I mean, there's so many billions of things that we need to think about, the skills and what to do. But now just, can we say something from our own experience that will bring the conversation back to the balance? Or maybe it won't, but we're doing that. We're saying something. We're just going to imagine that quote that I love, that the greatest power is to be able to change the conversation. Whoa, that really sends shivers through my system, that we can change the conversation. And often just by saying what's going on in us in a personal, non-judgmental way, non-blaming way. I'm just going to give you a minute. Just visit that place of bringing the conversation back by saying something. So let's, whatever is there for anybody is welcome. We're continuing the conversation. I want to say that the team and I went over the handout that I sent you, and Yoka and Clara helped revise it so it's in a better form. And we thought about, talking about these points of what deadens the conversation, what can enliven the conversation. But there's so much there. And we don't want you to be looking at points, but sort of seeing the points in you. So if you have those handouts and you want to refer to something in them, that's very, very welcome. but anything that's there from your breakout rooms, from our discussion earlier, is welcome. It's also very welcome, as we've been sort of developing our culture together, to say, oh, I want to hear from so-and-so. Do you have something to say? Or I'm curious about what so-and-so has to say. That's also welcome.
There was something that was there for me in towards the close of the first part of our session. I wrote some notes that I'm looking at. I'm appreciating that distinction that you brought, Lynn, around the kind of tending to the whole conversation, like tending to the conversation as another entity that's present. And in our breakout room, Elizabeth prompted me. It's like, well, there's also the culture that we're in that can be tended, like that's the even larger context. I'm like, whoa. And one distinction I learned from another kind of work, that's like called the circling, is kind of like there's a way that we can contact. I guess I'm using like a Comey concept, like contact, if anyone's familiar, or like kind of name or kind of be with that larger thing and name the thing that's kind of that I might see that's present that may be also present for others. Like towards the end of the conversation, I was hearing lots of people pointing at a wrestling in themselves of like, what do I say here? Like, this is such a hard place for me, whether let's say I don't know what to say because I don't know how to relate, or there's something in me that just feels so strongly that I don't know how to bring that without like crushing the other person, or like if there's just a silence, like what do I do? And there's this kind of wrestling that many people were talking about. So I guess like one of the things of like, maybe that's like naming the larger things and kind of seeing if I can almost demonstrate what I'm pointing at. And in that, in the kind of wrestling, there's this interesting distinction or separation that sometimes I notice in like a lot of in conversations of the people that I've talked about, kind of like there's the part in me that's like, what do I say? And it's almost like the what do I say part is trying to generate some output of, oh, the thing I say is X, Y, Z. And somehow there's a separation between the wrestling and the thing that I say. And in circling world, something that's been super helpful and felt so rich to me, and a freedom that came, is that they're like, oh, you can just say the thing that is the happening, like focusing style. Like, oh, there's something in me that's like wrestling with what to say right now. And I think that's exactly what I'm looking around. Katie, that's exactly what you're like, I don't know what to say, don't relate. And that is the in between conversation. That's not just talking about something, it's the thing that's happening right here.
What Jean calls talking from your experience rather than about something. Since this is our last meeting, I want to try not being the one, this is sort of like a step forward, not being the one to reflect and to hold all of the strands together, just for 10 minutes. We're going to try all of us doing that. So I'm sort of deputizing all of you to have my job as the host. So all of you are going to be in charge of, reflecting, putting the strands together, inviting people. And let's just see how that is. And that's a big risk to me, because I'm afraid that if I don't hold the strands, that they'll get like in crochet, that they'll get lost or something. So I'm going to take a risk in the next 7 minutes um, during this conversation to just see what happens if all of you do my job.
So Lynn, what you're saying is you're wanting to experiment with not being the person who responds and receives and makes sure that threads don't drop, and there's, it's a risk, feels like a risk that there's, yeah.
Yes. I feel very met.
And I'm just experimenting with trying to take a screen full of people in rather than zeroing in on my own little box.
So first of all, I kind of had to laugh a little bit that Lynn said that for 7 whole minutes she's going to do this experiment. I'm really courageous. Yeah. So, and then yeah, Laura was kind of jumping right in, and so. And I feel like, oh, yeah, well, apart from that, laughing about it, there's something in me that feels like, oh, that's something of a responsibility here, you know. It feels different, Lynn, when you say that, and like that we all together, you know, have that task or something. And, so I don't know what to do with it except for just I'm just gonna ask somebody to say something. So and I don't know who, because I want to ask so many people, but maybe I'll ask Anna. Anna, is there something you would like to say, or something from this evening what we have done so far?
I would like to hear what Rachel is keeping there. So it was there. So
just back to Laura's response to Lynn, and then Yoko coming in also. It feels like gathering around a Christmas tree or something, or it just feels like holding up one another. But there's this sensation of or an experience I'm having of delight, something close to delight and love, like seeing people who I love, who I know, all here together, and having Lynn, Risk, and Laura save the day and be right there with, like, it's just, it's sort of like watching people you like meet, and I don't know, it's something like seeing your children playing with other children, or like I don't know, it's something where I feel a sort of pride and joy. I've never said those together, but my mom used to say that all the time. But some kind of pride and joy in experiencing and witnessing the interaction, the willingness to meet each other. So that was a ton of words. Maybe Anna, you want to take back wanting to hear what I have to say, but it's like a pleasure, and that feels like a living conversation and kind of great fun to be with.
Rachel, you bring me a lot of joy, like all the idea of the Christmas tree and all together playing and everything. And the word that I'm taking the most from these 3 times together is risk. The children take risk. They don't even think if they're gonna cut themselves or kill themselves or whatever, you know. And you know, I don't know if, I want to share with you, my father died 6 months ago, and life has been a little bit hectic. Rachel knows lately with my family and everything. And there is something I want to take out from all this. like every day is precious and I'm willing to take the risk. And I don't care if the other person like my taking my risk or not. But I think I want to cry when I want to cry. I want to yell when I want to yell. I want to be upset when I want to be upset. And I really want to take the risk. And maybe if I take the risk, people will start taking the risk also. And being available and honest and different. And I was sharing with Martha that I spent 3 months in New York, and I felt like people like, well, I can say everyone, but I walking in the streets, I was feeling like really lonely. No one see you in the eyes. No one say hello. No one even cares about you. So the homeless were my best friends. I get to sit down by them and say, hi, how are you? How's your day? I don't even give them money, but they respond and they were happy about our connection. But the homeless were more available than people walking in the streets. Like they were like everyone in their cell phones, hooked with something else in their drama or the dilemma. And so I took the risk to speak with the homeless. And it was a lot of fun. So thank you, Rachel, for bringing that joy and that excitement. And I want to take the risk.
This is Martha. This isn't really a reflection of the conversation, but what has happened here for me is that in taking risk and seeing the individuals open themselves up and take a risk and being seen, and how each person has been received. And for me, this is like the perfect world, that to be able to take a risk and be held and doing it and supported while doing it, even if you know, like it's a flop, but I don't even know, like it's when I take a risk and I feel supported, no matter what the outcome, it's different. It doesn't feel like I failed. It just feels like I did something brave, no matter what the outcome. Yeah.
Feels to me like what you were saying, Martha, like taking a risk, it feels like it's never a flop, because just by doing it, it didn't flop. Like even if what you said, people don't exactly understand or get or agree with, it's just the act of doing it, you know, that makes it not be a flop, like makes it a success, you know. And I just want to go back to what Monica said too about, I think like Monica took that big risk before to bring up the earring story, you know, the earring story, and then Lynn named it the earring principle. And it's just something about that to me that's like, I'm never going to look at a pair of earrings the same way again. And I just find that to be like, oh, that's the earring principle. And like, just like, there's something in the giggle of it, the laughing of it, and what Yoke said too about Lynn's giving this time the big risk of 7 minutes to us. And just sometimes when there's humor in things, like I know humor can cover things up, but sometimes humor can be really like uniting. And I just want to say that that's here for me too.
Well, since Martha took a risk, I'll take a risk and speak. What I'm getting is what really is involved in having an open conversation, a live conversation. And Rachel with her, throwing a softball instead of spiking it at somebody. And it's something for me to learn that, if I feel really strongly about something, I can get, I have to learn to listen and to be receptive also to the other person. And even if I don't agree and won't agree, and it was Kate who said, I think, I don't know how to respond right now, but I'm with you. I guess it's a Jen Lin quote. And that's very helpful. The other thing I find is, I realized, is when you have a real personal connection with the subject under discussion. For instance, Isabel's talking about Haitians, and I have a very close relationship with a person who's in Haiti and was deported, and we're working to get him back. And it's very hard to be able to listen to someone who says, oh, those people, they shouldn't be here. They don't belong here or whatever. Why did they come here? And they should come here legally and blah, 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 whatever. And, how to sort of gain some perspective to be able to listen. It's just really hard when it's personal.
Speaking of personal, Monica, I just wanted to respond to you about your feeling people in New York weren't really friendly to you. And as a New Yorker for many years, that makes me feel sad that you didn't feel welcomed, or that you could speak to people in New York. I think New Yorkers are some of the nicest people in the world. I think that they just, sometimes there's so much stimulation going on around that it can seem that they're not as available. I wish I could have met you on the bus. And I'm also really glad that all those homeless people had a kind, lovely person who took the time to sit down and see them as equal human beings, because they are, and to sit down and spend the time to talk with them. I wish more of us would do the same. So just wanted to thank you for that, for being a New Yorker in that way and reaching out to others. So come back. You really need to stay in New York for 4 months to really feel like you can talk to anybody.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I know beautiful people in New York, beautiful. Well, Lynn is from New York, Rachel is from New York, my teacher is from New York, Charlotte. Well, she lives in New York, but anyway, I don't have to self-blame myself, and I didn't want it to be offensive to anyone, and that's part of what we were talking in this spontaneity, that sometimes we can say something that can be offensive for someone else. So because of your lovely response, I really want to explain myself. I don't have to go to New York to feel like I'm with sleeping people around me. Believe me, in my family, there's a lot of members that does that. So it doesn't, probably it's not about New York. It's about feeling isolated in a world where everyone is cut off. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people is cut off with television, this, that, business, rush, pressure, kids. So yes, it's kind of feeling isolated when everyone, well, not, I don't want to say everyone. Some of the people are disconnected and I'm trying to make a connection. So it's not about New York. Believe me, I have family members that I feel so isolated when I'm with them. Thank you, Clara, for making thank you so much. And for sure, I will come back. Lynn knows that I go very often. So next time I see you.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah. And thank you for explaining that. That really, I really get that, how, we don't have to be in a big city to feel like disconnected from others when people are just not present, And I do think in very big cities, it can be harder when you're feeling isolated to feel even more so, So yeah, so thank you. Thank you, really.
Hello, everybody. It's BJ. When we were first getting ready to begin the class, someone, I think Miriam, said her daughter was getting married and she was not planning to go. And so there was a kind of an awkwardness for a moment, and we went forward because there was a larger purpose for the entire group at the time. And I'm only on my phone, I can't see anyone. But Miriam, if you're still here, I just want you to know that I heard that. And if there's something you'd like to say further about it, it would be lovely to hear.
BJ, I don't think Miriam
left.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks. Then I'm done.
But thank you for naming that, BJ. That seemed like something that would have been nice to hear more about, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's been a little while since Jonathan spoke, and I may not recall everything, but I do want to reflect back about that kind of what you were saying, Jonathan, about our struggles and the wrestling with, to use your phrase, about around the I don't know what to say, and that varying people were speaking about, and then you also spoke about the that kind of notion of the conversation, and a certain sense having a life that we're part of, but also it's bigger than us, and that kind of thing, and how we can find the struggles or the challenges of finding our way into that messy thing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm going to say it because Monica, we were speaking about losing your father and a certain kind of rawness and vulnerability that may also have been part of your connecting with people. And I shared this story about an old friend of mine who was. I walked in to visit him in the hospital. He was suffering. It was about 17 years ago now, and he had cancer. And I'd walked into his room, and just after the doctors were leaving, and telling him that that the treatment that they were giving was not going to work. And so it was just after that, and I said to my friend, his name was Obi, I said to him, I don't know what to say. And I'm going to share what I often share on his behalf, is he said, that's okay, Steve. In matters like this, we're all fools. And so I think there's something very powerful about that. Yeah, we're all fools. So, but can still show up. So that was alive for me in an existential kind of way.
Well, since the 7 minutes are up, I think maybe 9. I want to say I love that as a way of closing our workshop, that in matters like this, living conversation, we're all fools and we're all so wise. I want to thank you for catching me as I was leaping in my risk of not being the coordinator here, and just appreciating everybody's dancing together and holding the dance and catching each other and catching the ball and all of these metaphors that we've been mixing. This has been really a wonderful experience for me, and I loved the best of it. I loved when I took my risk of not being the coordinator and just being part of the conversation. So we have only about 2 minutes. So anything that anybody wants to say as a closing words, this is the time.
I'd like to say thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome. Thank you.
For me, it seems that this personal experiences of Monica and Miss Steve and I forgot her name, but got personal, that it kind of felt like it brought us together. This bringing us together.
Yes, thank you.
It was great.
That's a wonderful principle to sort of take with us also, beside the earring principle, that the personal brings us together.
I just wanted to thank everybody for being part of these conversations that felt like, kind of like I was telling my group, like when you focus, where it feels like, this feels like there's really something here that's really important to me. And it's not quite in focus yet, but it feels very meaningful. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. I want to mirror that feel that way too. Something really important that isn't in focus yet, but maybe can't be quite in focus. And I want to thank all of you and hope to see you all soon in one way or another. And thank you so much.